This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Let's juxtapose a good example and a bad example of, critical thinking and policy making during the time of COVID. Both happened yesterday, or this week, in the case of this Norman, Oklahoma. You want the bad first? I think we'll go with the bad first.
Bad first, definitely.
Norman, Oklahoma Public School Board member Linda Sexton, during a discussion about whether or not to remask the kids at school.
Because it's just not okay for kids to commit murder by coming to school without a mask. And when it comes down to it, it's possible. They will cause a death of another child because they come to school without a mask.
You'll kill people if you don't send your kid to school without a mask.
Using the word murder. Kids would commit murder by not wearing their mask.
Could they go to prison too then, Dan, and be charged with maybe second-degree involuntary manslaughter?
The flip side of it is Matt Davidson. He's the superintendent of schools here in suburban Chicago in Elmhurst, to be specific, Timothy Christian. And here was his announcement via video yesterday after consideration of the mask mandate, the remasking mandate that Pritzker imposed, after the Timothy Christian had already made their decision about school being mask optional for parents and students.
After several nights to sleep on it, a productive exchange of ideas, and plenty of prayer, the board and I have taken the necessary time to respond rather than react to the press conference held by the governor last Wednesday. We've taken a prayerful and very methodical approach. We've determined that our goal is to stick with the Timothy Health Plan and thus remain mask optional. Now keep listening, please. This is really important. This isn't an act of defiance. We're not puffing our chest out. We're not ramping up for some big fight. Speaking personally, I'm not comfortable with that approach, and I wouldn't support it. We're not trying to make any statement. We're simply going to explore this further for the next few weeks, maybe longer, but we're going to turn over every stone. We're going to observe what happens over the next few weeks on this issue as most schools start before us, but ultimately, we're going to reach a conclusion on the legality of the announcement from the governor, especially as a private, faith-based, religious educational institution.
So, who do you think is behaving more responsibly? Which school would you send your kids? The school where you've got Linda Sexton as a board member in Norman, Oklahoma, or the Timothy Christian School in Elmhurst where Matt Davidson is the superintendent? Who's putting in the work and the thinking and messaging something responsible in addition to implementing something responsible with respect to this issue?
Well, obviously the superintendent of Timothy Christian, but after he released that video, then the ISB, Illinois School Board, came in and said, you will lose accreditation if you do not comply with the mask mandate.
Yeah, that's the threat to private schools, is we'll take your accreditation and maybe your tax credit scholarship funds for those students that attend your school.
Yeah, high school diploma's no good here.
With the help of those funds. But they're going to fight that, and they should. So the question is, whose world do you want to live in, and who's living in this one? Linda Sexton or Matt Davidson? Because it's about the choice it's coming down to right now. Not everybody will be as reckless as Linda Sexton in accusing children of possibly committing murder by not wearing a mask, but their hysteria is a half a dial turn less than that, isn't it? For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Alex Gutentag. She is a public school teacher and writer in California, and she wrote an excellent piece over at the Tablet magazine, tabletmag.com, that I had referenced, about a few weeks back when she wrote it. Alex, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So, would you say there's too few Matt Davidsons in K through 12 education and too many Linda Sextons these days?
Yeah, probably. And I think that since the rhetoric is so heightened, like in the clip that you played, where she was equating not wearing a mask to murder, it's very difficult in those circumstances for people to stand up and to, allow kids to show their faces at their place of school, given how strong some of the language is on the other side.
Yeah, one of the things that you pointed out in your War on Reality column, which is really important because it speaks to a number of issues, but how deadly COVID is versus how deadly people perceive it to be. And, when you have the murder word being thrown around, if you're not digging into the data because you have other responsibilities and so forth, then you think, well, this has to be serious. I mean, no rational person is going to use that sort of language if there's not some sort of existential threat facing us. But that's not really borne out by the data, is it?
Yeah, it's not, and especially with the issue of kids wearing masks in school, that's not borne out by the data either. And they had last year a dashboard tracking the different rates of COVID, whether kids were in school or out of school, and whether they were wearing masks or not. And all of that data showed that it really didn't make a difference if they were in masks or not in school. Because the cloth masks don't stop transmission, and that's been known for a long time, yet they're still telling us that kids need to wear masks, or some states, where I am in California, we have a mask mandate again now. So it's all basically become a lot of illogical hysteria that has not proven to benefit anyone in terms of COVID outcomes, and has also just caused a lot of damage, a lot of economic damage, social damage, and psychological damage to people.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because I know a lot of, I tweeted that there's psychological and emotional damage done when kids have to be clothed up and their faces covered for 8 to 10 hours a day. And I got pushed back a lot. So what kind of psychological damage have you been able to encounter by, doing these reports and investigating this?
Well, I think that it's kind of intuitive. Kids learn from social interaction. They learn from each other, and they need to see faces just like adults need to see faces. The face is a really central component to our lives. People's faces are how we recognize emotions. It's how we pick up on nonverbal cues. And the thing that has already happened to kids in a lot of places is that they already missed a year or more of instruction, and they already missed a year or more of interaction with their peers. So if we're asking them to take on this next intervention, when they've already sacrificed so much for basically no benefit, because school closures didn't really have any impact on case rates, if they've already sacrificed so much, it's kind of inhumane to make them wear masks, especially because for kids, they trust adults in their lives. They trust the adults who are implementing this. And it's a betrayal of that trust when we're asking them to do this intervention that's just for show, that doesn't have any real scientific benefit.
Well, and again, it's to people's understanding. So one of the points you make in your piece, just for example, Americans estimated the share of COVID-19 deaths for people between 18 and 24, the share of COVID deaths, 18 to 24, was 8%. It's actually 1/10 of 1%. So, when you're off by a factor of, say, 80, then you're not really getting the gist of what's happening.
Yeah, and there's a big disconnect between what a lot of mainstream media outlets have presented to people, and especially in the beginning when people were constantly being terrorized with graphs and data that was very misleading in terms of their overall understanding of the virus or the pandemic. There's this disconnect between what the mainstream media has presented to people and what's actually happening in reality. And this has led to a lot of trust of our expert class and our, public health officials that is really unearned, given how many times they've made really terrible mistakes and then not apologize or backtrack, but instead doubled down. And a lot of their strategies have not only affected people really negatively in terms of lockdowns and things like that, but have also failed to address the virus in any way. So there's just many, many examples of mismanagement. And also, of course, as you mentioned, a very intentional program to mislead people about the danger and the risk, where now we see people are still feeling like the risk is extremely high when that's not borne out by the data.
Well, here's something else, too, and this has, of course, gotten almost no coverage, but there's a National Bureau of Economic Research working paper that's out that is research conducted by researchers at the World Bank and also the University of Singapore that argues for every child lockdown saved, 1.76 children died due to economic contractions, especially in poorer areas. Similarly, rates of alcohol consumption and domestic violence have risen. Some studies suggest the substantial net benefits from suggests substantial net benefits from lockdowns. This study suggests the opposite.
Yeah, that's not surprising. I think there's a lot of evidence that the most vulnerable or poorest people in our society or throughout the entire world have really suffered the most because of these policies. And overall, I think it was something like in 2020, in the world, workers lost $3.7 trillion and billionaires gained $3.9 trillion, all under the guise of public health interventions.
So is the mainstream media and the CDC, are they lying right now? And they're, scaring everybody, saying cases are on the rise in children due to the Delta variant?
I'm not sure exactly what the motivation is, but I would say that they are intentionally exaggerating risk for children. And the question is, why? I mean, I think that one thing that has happened now is with the very intense push for vaccine mandates or even something like vaccine passports, we can kind of see this whole thing playing out again with the same completely illogical reasoning being pushed forward again.
And
so it's almost like Groundhog Day.
I know.
And what's going on in your school and with your fellow teachers that you speak with in California?
Well, in California in general, it's going to vary district to district, but they are going to have schools open for kids. So a lot of places in California really didn't reopen until maybe the last 6 weeks of school or the last 2 months of school. And a lot of that reopening was very limited. So now in California, at least for kids who are older, this might be some of the first times that they really have full-time school back again. And I think like everywhere else, the main question is, will it stay open? And also, how long will kids be expected to have masks?
She is Alex Gutentag. She's a public school teacher and writer in California. Check out her piece, which I'll tweet out again, The War on Reality, over at tabletmag.com, and other writings on COVID in the same place, tabletmag.com. Alex, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck at school.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. And she joined us on our turn